April 2010. The sun beats relentlessly over the arid Afghan landscape, casting long, harsh shadows across the desolate terrain of Kandahar. The U.S. forces are already on the ground, entrenched and prepared for their mission. Days of planning, recon, and careful coordination have led to this moment. The team moves with the quiet precision of soldiers who have seen the worst of war and emerged hardened and ready. But as the hours tick away, there is a gnawing uncertainty in the air, something that even the most seasoned operators can't quite shake. The operation at hand is nothing short of dangerous. The target, a Taliban compound in the heart of enemy territory. A high-value target tied to numerous deadly IED networks responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition forces. This mission is personal. The Americans have come to expect victory, but today there's a curveball: the Australians. Captain Chen and his men are inbound to assist. They arrive in a matter of hours, their reputation both a source of intrigue and skepticism. Some U.S. soldiers have heard the stories, how the Australians are known for their unorthodox methods, their intense discipline, and their willingness to push the limits. Others, however, have whispered doubts, questioning whether their reputation is earned or exaggerated. The idea of working with an outside force always carries an air of uncertainty. Would the Australians blend into the well-oiled U.S. machine, or would they be a liability? When the helicopters touch down on the tarmac, the dust swirls and settles around the figures stepping out. Clad in their tactical gear, the Australians immediately begin setting up without ceremony. No grand introductions, no gestures of camaraderie, just a quiet, unassuming professionalism that speaks volumes. Their actions show no sign of hesitation. Each movement is deliberate, efficient. The Americans watch in silence. There's a tension in the air, a palpable sense of expectation. The U.S. soldiers, used to being the dominant force in any given operation, now feel the unease of the unknown. Captain Morrison, leading the U.S. platoon, watches intently as Captain Chen steps forward to make the introductions. But there's no bravado, no theatrical gestures. Chen's handshake is firm but calm, and his gaze scans the surroundings with the sharpness of a man who's seen this all before. For a brief moment, Morrison wonders, can these savages, as some of the more cynical soldiers have called them, really be trusted to integrate into the mission? The skepticism lingers, but something about the Australians' quiet confidence begins to unsettle the unease. Perhaps they are something more than what their reputation implies. As the Australians begin their setup, there's a shift in the air, a subtle feeling that this mission is about to become far more complex than anyone anticipated. The hours tick by in tense silence as the U.S. team prepares for the operation. Finally, the two teams, U.S. and Australian, gather together to brief the mission. Morrison stands at the front, outlining the plan with precision. His voice is clear, rehearsed, and confident. He's leading a group of elite soldiers, and they've been preparing for this mission for weeks. Every contingency has been planned for, every angle considered. Nothing has been left to chance. But as Morrison surveys the group, his gaze lingers on the Australians. There's something about their presence that feels different. Captain Chen stands off to the side, his posture relaxed but alert. His eyes never leave the map, scanning every inch as Morrison speaks. When the time comes for questions, Chen's voice is calm, unhurried. He asks 3 questions, just 3, and they are incisive, sharp. "How do we ensure radio frequency compatibility?" Chen asks, his voice unwavering. "What's the medical evacuation timeline, and what's the exact composition of the courtyard walls?" The brevity of his questions stands in contrast to the usual flood of inquiries and clarifications that typically follow such briefings. There's no questioning of the mission itself, no unnecessary chatter. His men are already preparing themselves, reading the map, reviewing the details with their typical intensity.
The U.S. soldiers look at each other, bewildered. This isn't what they expected. Where is the hesitation? Where are the doubts, the concerns about working with an outside team? The Australians seem to trust the plan implicitly. Morrison is impressed, but there's still a lingering feeling of unease. Can this trust really be earned in just a few hours? What happens when they enter the compound, when the bullets start flying? Will the Australians be as steady then? As the meeting ends, Morrison's mind races. The Australians have passed the first test. They're professionals, no doubt. But in the heat of battle, when lives are on the line, can they truly rely on these men who have yet to prove themselves in the field? The two teams move into the next phase of their preparation, the real test, where theory gives way to action. The time for talk is over. The sun sets over the barren landscape as the two teams head to the rehearsal pit. The terrain is marked out with engineering tape, crude approximations of the compound's walls and entry points. The ground is hard and unforgiving, the air filled with the dust of preparation. The U.S. forces are used to this part of the mission. The practice drills are their bread and butter, and the SEALs have run these routines 100 times before. But this time it feels different. The Australians are already in position, moving swiftly and silently, setting up their gear. There's no wasted movement, no hesitation. Morrison watches closely as the Australians go through the motions. They move with a fluidity that is almost unsettling. The U.S. soldiers have their own rhythm, their own style of operating, but the Australians seem to be operating on a different level altogether. They breach the mock doors with astonishing precision. The charge placement is flawless, the execution flawless. There's no room for error in this game, and the Australians have mastered the art of flawless execution. Morrison feels the first twinge of doubt. These men aren't just good, they're on another level. They understand the battlefield in a way that goes beyond just training. It's instinctual, ingrained in them. They've done this 1,000 times before. Then Miller speaks up. He's young, brash, and always ready to challenge the status quo. He raises an issue with the Australians' plan. He argues that the charge placement for the breach is too conservative. A larger charge, he says, would break the door faster, maintaining the momentum of the assault. There's a pause. The Australians don't react with defensiveness or anger. They simply listen. Captain Chen assesses the situation with his usual calm. Finally, he speaks. His explanation is simple. The larger charge would send shrapnel into the sleeping quarters behind the door. His team has chosen a more controlled charge to minimize risk to civilians. Morrison nods, impressed. This isn't just tactical genius, it's moral clarity under pressure. The U.S. team, though skeptical at first, adjusts their plan to match the Australians' approach. The respect begins to grow. This is what professionalism looks like: calm, deliberate, and thoughtful. The Americans begin to realize that these savages aren't savages at all. There's something else entirely. As the rehearsals continue, the two teams grow more in sync. But the real test will come when they step into the compound, when the real battle begins.
The compound looms ahead, its high walls and narrow entry points offering little cover. The target inside is a high-value Taliban commander, responsible for countless deaths through his IED networks. The Americans have been briefed, and they know the stakes. But even with all their training, they can't shake the feeling that something might go wrong. As they reach the compound's perimeter, Morrison signals for the teams to halt. The Australians, who have been unusually quiet throughout the approach, now begin their final preparations. Without a word, they set up their positions with military precision. Morrison observes them, noting how they communicate through hand signals. No words, just a shared understanding. The U.S. team takes its positions as well, ready to breach the compound. The breach is timed precisely. The Australians go first, hitting the north side with speed and precision. Morrison's SEAL team hits the main entrance simultaneously. The explosion rattles the air, the sound deafening as the walls crack and debris flies. The dust settles, and for a moment, everything is eerily quiet. Then,
all hell breaks loose. Taliban fighters appear in the doorways and windows, weapons raised. The Americans spring into action, but it is the Australians who immediately take charge of the situation. Their movements are coordinated, purposeful. They push into the compound with a speed and aggression that the U.S. team can only admire. The firefight intensifies, and the Americans find themselves caught in a crossfire. The Taliban fighters are relentless, their positions well armed and fortified. The Americans are accustomed to these kinds of engagements, but they quickly realize they're facing a well-organized force. The geometry of the compound works against them. Too many angles, too many choke points. And then it happens. Without hesitation, Captain Chen takes control. His voice cuts through the chaos, issuing commands that are clear, concise, and unwavering. The Australians push forward, taking key positions while the U.S. soldiers hold their ground. They've trained for situations like this, but watching the Australians in action, working with an ease and synchronization the U.S. team can't match, sends a ripple of realization through Morrison. These men are no ordinary soldiers. They're something else entirely. The Australians move without words, covering each other's flanks, seamlessly shifting from one position to another. Every move is purposeful, efficient. It's a dance of death, and the Australians are the masters of it. Morrison's team, now deeply impressed, falls into step with them. They've been thrust into the same fight, but now it feels as though they are part of a larger, more cohesive unit. The respect, earned in battle, begins to shift the power dynamic. No longer are the Australians outsiders, they are partners in this deadly dance. The compound is nearly secured, but the battle is far from over. U.S. and Australian forces have cleared most of the rooms, but there's a critical area that remains untouched, the central courtyard. Taliban fighters, though disoriented by the surprise assault, have regrouped behind a stacked wall of supplies. They're heavily armed, determined to hold their ground. Morrison surveys the situation. His team is positioned on the main floor of the compound, but the Taliban's defensive positions are fordable. There's no easy way through. The Americans are trained to fight in these conditions, but this situation is different. The geometry of the courtyard, the angles of fire, everything about it seems designed to stall their advance. The walls are high, providing excellent cover for the enemy. Morrison knows they can't push forward without taking casualties. The stall has set in, a dangerous moment where the momentum of the assault could be lost entirely. But just as Morrison begins to weigh his options, the radio crackles to life. It's Captain Chen's voice, as calm as ever. We're ready on the north side, moving into position. The Australians, without missing a beat, are already anticipating the next move. The sudden shift in the flow of the battle is a testament to their discipline. The U.S. forces, who are struggling to make headway in the courtyard, now find themselves with new hope. Morrison looks at the Australians, who are moving swiftly and silently into position. Their movements are impeccable, and in that moment, Morrison knows that they're not just here to assist, they're here to lead the way. The Australians have saved the Americans from what could have been a costly stalemate. They've opened up new possibilities, allowing the U.S. forces to push forward. As the Australians advance, the Taliban, caught off guard by the new angle of attack, begin to falter. The U.S. forces push forward, but it is the Australians who secure the compound's critical points. With a brutal efficiency, they clear the courtyard, eliminating any remaining resistance. The compound falls silent. The battle is over, and the high-value target is secured. But as Morrison takes stock of the operation, he realizes that the real victory here isn't just in the capture of the target, it's in the respect that has been forged in the heat of battle. The U.S. team, once skeptical of the Australians, now knows exactly what they're made of. The two teams have fought side by side, and in doing so, they forged a bond that transcends nationality. It's a bond built on professionalism, trust, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. As the men move to extract, Morrison looks over at Captain Chen. The Australians' quiet confidence has become something more, something that has earned the respect of every U.S. soldier on the ground. The SAS didn't just assist in the operation, they were the key to its success. The lesson is clear. Sometimes true power doesn't come from size or firepower. It comes from precision, discipline, and the courage to do what others won't. The dust begins to settle as the U.S. and Australian teams prepare for extraction. The adrenaline that fueled the battle slowly fades, replaced by the heavy weight of reflection. In the aftermath of the mission, the compound is eerily quiet. The sounds of gunfire and explosions are now replaced by the rustling of wind in the dry grass and the distant hum of helicopters. The tension that had filled the air earlier in the day has dissipated, but something deeper has emerged, a shared understanding. Captain Morrison stands at the edge of the compound, scanning the battlefield. His eyes fall on his team, who are securing the perimeter, tending to the wounded, and preparing to move out. But his thoughts are elsewhere. His mind keeps returning to the Australians, how they moved with precision and confidence, as if the chaos around them was merely a part of the natural order. They had done more than fight alongside the Americans. They had seamlessly integrated into the operation, taking charge at moments when the U.S. forces faltered. The U.S. soldiers had seen their fair share of joint operations, but nothing like this. They had always relied on their own methods, methodical, efficient, and aggressive when necessary. But the Australians brought something else to the table. Their calm under pressure, their quiet leadership, and their ability to think on their feet had made all the difference. Morrison couldn't help but marvel at how quickly the Australians had adapted to the situation, responding to each twist and turn with a level of professionalism that was beyond impressive. Captain Chen stands nearby, coordinating his team, his voice soft but commanding. He's a man of few words, but when he speaks, every syllable counts. There's no need for grand speeches or post-operational debriefings. The Australians simply get to work. They're already planning the next phase, ready to move on to the next mission. Morrison approaches him, his steps measured. He hesitates for a moment, unsure of how to address the man who has not only proven his worth, but has changed the way Morrison views combat. He doesn't have to say much. Chen knows what's on his mind. "Good work today, Captain," Morrison says, his voice low but filled with respect. Chen looks at him, his expression unreadable. He nods once, but it's enough. No words are necessary. The bond between the two leaders has been forged in the crucible of battle, and it's stronger than any exchange of pleasantries could ever be. As the teams move to extract, Morrison can't help but reflect on how far they've come in just a few short hours. What had begun as a hesitant partnership between two elite forces has evolved into something far greater, a unified team, one that had fought not as Americans and Australians, but as brothers in arms. But even as they prepare to leave the compound, there's a sense of unease in the air. The operation may be over, but the war is far from finished. The Taliban's reinforcements have been dealt with for now, but there's always more lurking in the shadows. The mission was a success, but the fight is ongoing. As the helicopters approach, Morrison feels the weight of the operation settling in. He looks over at the Australians again, his respect for them growing by the second. They have done more than just fight. They've shown him what it means to be truly professional in the chaos of combat.
The chopper ride is quiet. The roar of the helicopter's engines fills the air, drowning out the sounds of the battlefield behind them. The U.S. soldiers are physically exhausted, their bodies bruised and battered from the day's events. But there's something else weighing on them, an emotional exhaustion. The tension that had been present since the moment the Australians arrived has now been replaced by something else. There's a sense of camaraderie, a feeling that, for the first time, they're not just sharing a mission, they're sharing a bond. Morrison sits next to Captain Chen, the two men not speaking but understanding each other without words. They fought side by side, and in doing so, they've learned to trust each other in ways that words could never fully convey. As the helicopter makes its descent towards the extraction point, Morrison reflects on the journey that brought them to this moment. He remembers the skepticism he felt when the Australians first arrived, how he wondered if they would be able to hold up under pressure. But now, as he watches Chen and his team move with quiet efficiency, Morrison realizes how wrong he had been. The Australians had earned their place on the battlefield. The helicopter touches down, and the teams begin to disembark. Morrison takes one last look at the compound, then turns to Chen. He extends his hand, the gesture simple but filled with meaning. Chen shakes his hand firmly, his expression as calm as ever. There's no fanfare, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. But for Morrison, this handshake means something more. It represents the respect that has been earned, not through words, but through action. The Australians didn't need to prove anything. They simply did what needed to be done. As the two men walk away from the helicopter, Morrison feels a sense of pride in what they've accomplished, but also a sense of anticipation for what comes next. The mission may be over, but the war is far from finished. And in this war, the Australians will be by his side, not as outsiders, but as true allies. For the first time in a long time, Morrison feels a deep sense of trust in the men around him. They fought together, bled together, and in doing so, they've become something more than just soldiers. They've become a brotherhood.
In the days that follow, both teams continue to work together on several more missions. The Australians and Americans have forged a bond that only battle can create. They no longer see each other as foreign forces. They are simply soldiers, fighting side by side for a common cause. But as they prepare for another operation, a new challenge arises. The Taliban have regrouped and are planning a major counteroffensive. Intelligence suggests that they are preparing to launch an attack on a key U.S. base in the region. The stakes have never been higher. Morrison knows that the success of this mission will depend on the strength of their partnership with the Australians. The plan is risky, and there's no room for error. But as he looks around at his men and the Australians by his side, Morrison feels a sense of confidence he hasn't felt in a long time. The battle that follows is one of the fiercest they've faced. The Taliban come at them with everything they have, but the combined strength of the U.S. and Australian forces proves unstoppable. The Australians move with the same precision they've displayed in every mission, calm, methodical, and deadly. They anticipate the enemy's every move, cutting them off at every turn. In the end, the operation is a success, and the U.S. base is saved, but the cost is high. There are casualties on both sides. As Morrison watches the wounded being carried to the medevac helicopters, he realizes that the true value of this mission wasn't just in the victory, it was in the bond that has been forged.
The Australians have proven themselves time and again. They've earned the respect of every U.S. soldier on the battlefield. And as the dust settles, Morrison understands something he hadn't fully grasped before. The war may be fought by soldiers, but it's won by the strength of their brotherhood. The days following the successful operation are a mix of relief and somber reflection. The mission was a success, but the cost is not lost on anyone. The combined efforts of the U.S. and Australian forces have delivered a crushing blow to the Taliban, but in the quiet moments after the battle, the weight of the sacrifice becomes clearer. U.S. and Australian soldiers alike tend to the wounded, ensuring that the injured are evacuated and receiving medical care. The battlefield may be quiet, but the emotional toll of war lingers in the air. As Captain Morrison watches the medevac helicopters take off, he reflects on the journey that brought him here. He knows the Australians were not just an asset in this battle, they were crucial to its success. The respect he had for them had evolved from mere curiosity and skepticism into genuine admiration. They were no longer the foreign team he had been unsure of, they were brothers in arms. Their shared experiences had forged an unbreakable bond, one built on trust, respect, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. Morrison approaches Captain Chen, who stands off to the side, quietly observing the extraction. The two men exchange a brief nod before Morrison speaks. "You did good today, Captain," he says, his voice steady, but there's an undercurrent of something deeper. Chen looks at him, his face impassive, but his eyes hold something that tells Morrison the bond between them has been forged not just in battle, but in the quiet moments when the stakes are at their highest. "We did good," Chen replies, his voice calm and sure, as always. "We worked together." There's a long pause, as if both men are processing the magnitude of what they've just accomplished. For a brief moment, the weight of their shared experience hangs in the air between them. Then, as if on cue, they both turn their attention back to the wounded, their focus shifting to the task at hand. The job is not yet done, but there is a sense of satisfaction in the way they stand side by side. For Morrison, this moment feels significant. The Australians, once viewed with suspicion and doubt, have now proven themselves, not just in battle, but in their character, their professionalism, and their ability to lead when it matters most. The trust between the two teams is no longer something that needs to be earned. It has been solidified in the crucible of combat. The weeks that follow are a blur of operations, each one more intense than the last. The U.S. and Australian forces continue to work together, their bond growing stronger with each mission. The Australians are no longer seen as an external force. They are part of the U.S. team, integral to every operation, their presence a quiet assurance of success. The missions they complete together continue to yield results. They clear compounds, disable IED networks, and gather critical intelligence that disrupts the Taliban's operations. But it is in the quiet moments, away from the front lines, that the true depth of the partnership between the U.S. and Australian teams becomes apparent. As Morrison and Chen sit together in the mess hall one evening, the conversation shifts from the usual tactical talk to something more personal. It's clear that the two men have come to respect not just each other's skills, but each other's character. They talk about their families, their lives before the war, and the sacrifices they've made to be here. There is no more tension between them, only understanding. "We've been through a lot together, haven't we?" Morrison says, his voice a little softer than usual. Chen nods, his expression thoughtful. "More than most men will ever experience in a lifetime," he replies. In that moment, Morrison realizes just how far they've come. The bond between the two units has transcended the battlefield. It's no longer just about completing missions. It's about the people standing next to you, the trust you place in them, and the unspoken understanding that when everything goes wrong, you'll have each other's backs. As the sun sets over the base, casting a warm glow over the soldiers preparing for the next operation, Morrison feels a sense of pride he hasn't felt in a long time. The war isn't over, and the challenges ahead are still daunting, but for the first time in a while, he feels prepared. The U.S. and Australian teams have become one. They've earned each other's respect, and that respect will carry them through whatever comes next. For Morrison, the lessons learned in Afghanistan go beyond tactics and strategies. They're about brotherhood. They're about the men you trust with your life, the ones who fight beside you, not because they have to, but because they believe in the same cause. And in the end, it's that belief, that unwavering commitment, that will see them through to the end of this war. As he stands up to leave the mess hall, Morrison exchanges one last look with Captain Chen. There's no need for words. They've said everything that needs to be said in the heat of battle. The respect they share is evident in every action, every decision, and every life they've saved. This war has changed them, but it has also brought them together in a way nothing else could. And when the war is over, it will be this bond that lasts, the unbreakable connection forged in the fires of combat between two elite forces who have learned to fight, bleed, and win together. The end.